everybody, and you're very welcome to the latest episode of the South Tip Arts Podcast. Well, we have been very busy here behind the scenes at the South Tipperary Arts Centre over the last couple of months, but we're absolutely delighted to finally be able to launch our 2021 programme. And the first exhibition of the 2021 season features Dara McGrath, photographer, whose Project Cleansweep runs from April the 6th until May the 1st here at South Tipperary Arts Centre. This exhibition will be delivered online due to COVID-19 restrictions, and it has relevance and impact far beyond the specific sites that it deals with. Project Cleansweep takes its name from a Ministry of Defence report issued in 2011, identifying sites in the UK where tens of thousands of tonnes of mustard gas, phosgene and other lethal chemicals were, since World War I, made, processed, stored, burned and dumped in England, Wales and Scotland. To this day, such sites remain problematic, even when they have been returned to civilian usage. The MOD released details of Operation Cleansweep in 2011 to provide reassurance that residual contamination at UK sites did not pose a risk to human health or the environment. I caught up with Dara during the installation of Project Cleansweep, and he told me a little more about how he became involved with this research. Dara, it's brilliant to have you here on the podcast this week. Very exciting for us to actually have an exhibition being installed in the building. It's been 3 months and a bit. So we're absolutely thrilled to have you here. I've just been leafing through your book actually, which I've noticed is divided, like this is a massive project, Project Cleansweep. It's a massive project. And even my sense of it, actually seeing the book is really after putting it into perspective for me, how big of a project this is. And actually, all this information gathered into this publication, it's so important in that, like a lot of this information is, shall we say, under the radar in some way, or like people might not know about it. And it seems, I noticed that you've got this divided into 4 sections. So I was going to ask you about that, how you broke it down. So you're looking at things like the disposal of chemicals, storage of chemicals, manufacturing particularly testing. Is one. Some of the things I read in the testing section I found quite shocking, but it's kind of mind-boggling how much of this stuff has gone on over the years when you see it all put together in a book form. It's a long-term project. You've been working on it, you told me, for 10 years, which is a big chunk of your life.
It certainly is.
Yeah. So how did you come, to build this body of work?
Well, let's go right back to the start. In 2011, I was in my local pub with my new infant child. Right. On a Friday afternoon, I picked up a Guardian newspaper and I saw a little byline saying Project Cleansweep was being launched by the Ministry of Defence because they had 14 sites. They didn't know what kind of military activity in relation to chemical weapons went on there.
Right.
So basically, they've just lost the records of what activities went on in these sites. So about 2 months later, after reading that, I had the opportunity of doing some work over in the UK. And I took a little bit of time out to go physically and go visit these sites.
Yeah.
Now, firstly, when I got the report, it gave grid coordinates. When I got to the places, of course, naturally, the grid coordinates were incorrect. Yeah. They were out by half a mile to a mile, maybe even 5 miles. Yeah. So with that, I photographed these sites, done more investigation, and it seemed to open a whole can of worms, really. That we were talking about dozens upon dozens upon dozens of sites. I think I'm up to about 90 sites.
It's incredible. And actually, where can people buy the book if they'd like to buy the book? Is there somewhere specific?
It's on my website, www.daramcgrath.com.
It's a really beautiful, it's beautifully put together. It's a lovely production.
Or just Google my name and you'll get loads of articles, essays in relation to the project.
Just in terms of all your beautiful images that we're going to have on the walls, this also has extra little bits and pieces of your research that really, I think, sort of fills out some of the questions that people might have about what's this all about.
When you talk about that, it makes me think about legitimacy of photography. I, as a creative, are presenting these works on the wall.
Yeah.
And you're taking, as a member of the public or a viewer, you're taking it as given that I'm telling the truth. But I find that that's problematic. Problematic in photography about truth.
Yeah.
And representation of truth, of facts. we live in a very digital age and we're over consuming imagery
all the time.
All the time.
Yeah.
And by
and
that
a growing proportion of that is like fake imagery or created by AI and we're not always entirely sure if even what we're looking at is real.
Yeah, I mean we have these deep fakes now where they put a showbiz star's face onto another body.
And they're getting really, really good. That's the other
Very
thing.
good, yeah, absolutely. But it also, going back in the early days of the project, I brought it to a portfolio review where you go and present a body of work to somebody, an industry professional. And they said to me at the end of my presentation, Dara, I don't believe you.
Yeah.
And I was quite taken back by that.
Yeah.
But it made me think about, they've got a point there.
Yeah.
I've got to go and show that these photographs are real.
Well, just because you have integrity about the images, I would probably believe you. It depends on the person, doesn't it?
It does.
I take everything people say at face value. So,
of course, that's human nature.
You know, But you're perfectly right to say that. Like, who says it's right, or just because you're showing me this image and you're saying this happened there, we need more than that. That's obviously what he said to you.
Yeah. So from that, I think I made a concerted effort to bring in archival imagery, drawings, archival documents, objects I've collected over eBay over that long period in relation to these sites. So I've kind of built up kind of like reports almost.
Yeah.
And as you said, I focused on 4 main sites in the book: Harper Hill, Ridmoyne, Lime Bay, and the last one, Grenard Island.
Yeah.
These were kind of 4 pivotal events or sites in the United Kingdom, which kind of are milestones really in the whole history of that kind of industrial military complex.
Yeah. It's incredible because you never would have, Grangemouth, they knew there was like an RAF base there or whatever in those areas, but you don't really think about what's going on below the surface, and mustard gas and stuff like that being stored. The ramifications of those things are obviously still affecting the landscape, the people, public health even maybe to some extent. I suppose groundwaters and all that type of stuff is damaged or polluted or to this day probably if the stuff's still leaching into it. So have any of these sites been properly cleaned up now? Are they still classified as contaminated areas? Or?
Some yes, some no.
Yeah.
One example is a place down in Cornwall called Nonsacook, and that was a secret sarin or nerve gas agent factory for a period of 5 years between 1950 and 55. They dumped a lot of the equipment they used to clean up.
That's fascinating. Because like the war was over then.
Well over.
What were they doing?
Producing sarin gas.
Yeah.
You got to understand that when we had the nuclear arms race back in the Cold War, you had a group of scientists in Russia, America, places like the UK, justifying their positions or justifying their jobs because of the threat of the Eastern Bloc powers launching a surprise attack using chemical biological weapons on places like the United Kingdom. So they stoked up the fear that this potentially could be a threat to the realm, could be a threat to the United Kingdom. So they kind of set up scenarios, test scenarios of what if Russia did fly a plane along the south coast of the UK and did release a nerve agent into the atmosphere over huge swathes of the population. So what they did was they undertook these experiments called the Lime Bay trials, later renamed by the MOD called the Dorset Defence Trials. It's like global warming and climate change. All this terminology to kind of dampen down the
justify their reason, like it's like protectionist rather than
So you had at that time and right up to the mid 70s, a lot of the Western powers were still producing chemical and biological weapons. So they were kind of in competition with the nuclear scientists in kind of justifying their jobs. And nuclear industry wasn't advanced as it was now, where it was actually almost in competition internally within these nations.
That's amazing.
And then you had this international competition between the Russians and the Americans. You know, of one-upmanship, shall we say. We've got more weapons than you.
The mentality is just crazy, isn't it?
Yeah.
The other part that kind of caught my attention was manufacturing waste.
Yes.
Which is, I mean, no matter where you are in the world, I think that's a kind of a big concern for everybody.
But it's interesting to see these places maybe 40, 50 to 70 years' time. What happens to these places? What becomes of these places?
Yeah.
And I found kind of trends of what happened to these sites around. Some are basic agricultural land. Yeah. Some have been compounded, as in you had a manufacturing plant, and then on top of that now you have a petrochemical industry.
Right.
So these sites, these almost like brown sites, as they call them, where they've just continually over the decades have had heavy industries on them. Yeah. You spoke about Grangemount, which is a site east of Edinburgh along the coast, or very near the coast. It was a former RAF base where they stored chemical weapons during World War One. In case there were places called FFDs, forward filling dumps, depots, shall we say, that basically they had these chemical weapons on the runways, ready to go
if they were needed.
If Hitler had attacked Britain first. So you had all these places, maybe about 20 all around the coast of the UK, ready to hit Germany when and if Hitler attacked with...
It's fascinating. Yeah. And you're clearly fascinated by the history as well, which makes sense because that's your background, isn't it?
Yes. I'm fortunate enough to work for Cork Public Museum in Cork City. I've been with them for over 15 years now. Mm-hmm. And I'm their digital officer, so I deal with the archive. Yeah. I deal with image requests, things like that. Yeah. And I also design exhibitions, things like that for them. But it has given me kind of working with historians, working with academics from UCC, where they have I think it's rubbed off me, where they have a very methodical approach to a subject matter, but they also have tangential studies around, instead of just focusing on one place or one event, those things have a kind of a knock-on effect to other events happening in around the time or before or after. Yeah. And also you have to be very analytical and you have to study every nook and cranny of an event.
Like the guy said to you in the portfolio review, we don't believe you. So like all this peripheral stuff and the archive stuff and everything totally gives it real solidity. And like, as I know I'm going on about the book a bit, but the book is really...
Let's talk about the exhibition as well.
Builds out the images really, really well.
I mean, what's on exhibition here at South Tipperary Arts Centre is a fraction of the overall project. But yeah, as you say...
Because while you say 14 sites here, when we spoke earlier on, you said that you're up to about 90
Yeah, and
sites
it's still
now.
ongoing. They're still discovering sites all over the UK. I know in one place in Lincolnshire, that they found a cache of chemical weapons left over from the Second World War.
Every time you hear of a new find somewhere, you kind of go, oh, happy there.
I do.
A little bit.
But it has been it's almost 10 years.
Yeah.
And they're making I have to move on.
It's a very consuming kind of project, I imagine, because the further you delve into it and then like all your research in the background and everything, that's really... be so easy to kind of become obsessed with that.
Yeah, it can.
The detriment of all your other work. So,
of course it can. Yeah. But I had to go and physically visit these sites. So I was restrained because I had young children at the time. Yeah. So it was only midterm Easter break. So between those periods, I was researching on the internet, buying books, researching through books. Yeah. I mean, it's fantastic what the digital age can give us.
It is actually brilliant.
In relation to research tools. You can just street view these places practically, which kind of gives you what you're getting into.
Well, you get a sense of the place even before you've been to it physically. I know it's not the same thing, obviously, but, in terms of kind of walking through the landscape and kind of spotting things that might be of interest, when you do actually get to visit it, is probably really, really helpful in planning out your shots and things even. And
you research these places a lot.
Yeah.
So you go to these sites and you have that knowledge upon you. You have a different perspective than just arriving and just hoping for the best. With my photography or my approach to photography, I don't let anything to chance. Yeah, there is a certain amount of chance. Mm-hmm. But I work these sites, as in one site, Harper Hill, I've gone back about 7 times over space of 7-8 years, because seasons change, environments change, things change, and by having that, you kind of get to know places. You get to know the people as well. You say, I'm coming back next year. Can you dig out this for me? You make contacts, and they can send you materials in between the visits, and you start a kind of a relationship with people.
Which is great.
Which is great, because they would have more knowledge. They would have a more local, community-based knowledge.
Local knowledge is brilliant. This exhibition has travelled quite a number of places around the UK, and it's also been here in Ireland as well.
Correct,
and I think it's probably fair to say that wherever it's been, it's caused some pretty big discussions among the local communities who are viewing it.
I was fortunate in 2017 to collaborate with a Professor Ulf from the University of Kent in Canterbury, and he got funding from the college because Professor Ulf Schmidt is probably one of the foremost authoritarian people about chemical biological weapons. He's represented people taking claims against sarin guinea pig testing in the 1950s for compensation claims. He's sometimes on Channel 4. He was also a lot on German media, especially around the Skripal to Salisbury Novichok poisoning there recently. And I collaborated with him. We set up kind of mobile exhibition stands, and we brought him to the actual communities, 10 actual communities all over the United Kingdom where these events actually happen. So we brought it to the Inner Hebrides, right down to places outside Swansea, Cornwall, Cambridge, Yorkshire, Manchester, places like that. So, we've been to the four corners of the United Kingdom. We brought them into, we set up the exhibitions in community centres in these villages, and we invited members of the community to come in and have a talk with us and show how important their villages are in the whole story of chemical biological weapons. But there was a lot of local environmental concerns, not just about chemical biological weapons, but about pollution, about heavy industry. So there was a lot of, environmental debate.
Is it fair to say then that, as you brought it around, that the people in the specific local communities knew what was happening in these sites? Or maybe sometimes they didn't really know anything about the kind of nefarious things that had gone on around them?
I think the majority of the people had kind of an inkling, something did happen. We did have a military base here during World War II, or right up to the 60s or 70s, but we didn't know exactly what went on here. But through my research, I was able to say, they did have they did do biological weapons testing here. So it did fill in a gap that was in local people's idea of their local history.
Did you find people who were maybe a bit shocked about?
Of course, of course.
Like there's stuff like, if you heard something like mustard gas was buried, in just outside your village. It's bound to raise a bit of concern.
It did. I think that the most concern was when I brought it to a little village on the Gower Peninsula in Wales, just near Swansea, called Penclawyd. Penclawyd is out in kind of a piece of land that juts out into the Irish Sea, and it has sand dunes and things like that, and they did do anthrax bomb testing there during the Second World War, but they deemed it a failure because the bombs didn't open up properly because they hit the sand and they kind of oozed out anthrax. But even today, these sand dunes, they're kind of they have signs all over. If you find anything, do not pick it up. It could be old ordnance. But in that estuary area where Penclawyd is, there's a local cockles and mussels industry. But over the years, it's been declining. So we had a lot of people of, let's say, cockle business owners coming to one of our talks and kind of thinking that there was some connection between anthrax and the depletion of cockles and mussels in the local area. And we said, listen, that it wouldn't be true. That anthrax would be directly linked to the cockle and mussel industry. So there was a bit of relief with the people who came. That, it was basically pollution. Coming down from Swansea or whatnot into the estuary. That was basically, it was causing, the decline in the industry.
Is it fair to say then that it maybe provoked some local activism from environmental groups that you would have met up with, or
It would have, yes. I would have said, it was a lesson in history. Because a lot of these places were quite rural and out of the way. That people found it as a kind of a meeting point. Also to share their stories, and we have fantastic people coming along saying, listen, my dad did work in that base,
Yeah.
or my dad did work in Portendown. I grew up in Portendown. Now, Portendown is the Ministry of Defence scientific base that's in Salisbury, on Salisbury Plain.
Yeah.
So we had people coming in telling their story about what's it like to grow up in a place where your dad's a scientist and he's dealing with viruses like H1N1, Ebola, things like that. What the aim of the collaboration on behalf of the University of Kent is they wanted personal stories about how local communities were affected. So that goes into a kind of an archive in the University of Kent, which is kind of
which is lovely, because your work is kind of feeding somebody else's work, their work's feeding your work. It's lovely, isn't it?
It's lovely, and it's we didn't want to be patronising anyway. So we weren't a kind of a government agency coming down. Yeah. You know, I was an artist. Yeah. He was an academic. So we were just two people who had a common interest. Yeah. From, let's say, from different worlds. Different worlds. I wasn't an expert. You know, he was an expert, but he was a kind of a passive kind of expert. Where he gathers these information. And presents it.
Well, you were able to translate it into visual then.
Visuality, yes.
That's fantastic. What is your hope then for the show here in the Arts Centre in Clonmel? What do you hope to kind of provoke locally in people?
Well, I think that's it. Yeah. I want to provoke. I want people to see these images and to kind of say, well, transpose them into your own locality. If you had a contaminated site, you know, how do you understand? How do you kind of understand what goes on here? Look at the history of the place. Look at how this place can become something else in the future. Just basically, I want the people to discuss. Look at these photos. Look at the history I correlated about these places, and kind of think about your own locality. What goes on environmentally within your own locality? And possibly engage with that in whatever way you can.
Want, or,
You know, I'm not saying being an activist and go and protest outside a brown site factory or, you know, whatever. But to be aware of it and just to be aware of it.
So as part of this show, there's going to be an online discussion which we will be broadcasting here at some point. It's obviously going to be a Zoom webinar at this point. Would be a really good way for people to, if they had any stories or observations, to bring them to you at that point.
Of course,
because clearly you're constantly gathering more details about more places, and it's like this work could almost go on forever.
It could.
If you didn't kind of bookend it somehow.
I mean, I have spoken to people and they said, listen, I work in America, I know about these sites in America, and it goes on. You have places in France, Belgium,
everywhere,
that dipped on chemical mustard gas during the First World War. You have acres upon acres of sites that nothing grows in. And then you have Germany, and then you have all these sites along the Baltic North Sea where they dumped a lot of these chemical weapons. And you have places like the Beaufort Dyke, that little bit of sea between Northern Ireland and Scotland.
I did not know that about that.
And it's the biggest marine munitions dump in the world.
That is incredible.
So let Boris build his bridge over that.
Oh my goodness. You wonder what unsettling that ground would do to everything. Doesn't even bear thinking about it.
But I think from all my travel, it's best left alone, all these sites. They cause local contamination, and a lot of these chemicals would be neutralised over time. But still, I think that the public perception of knowing that these weapons are still around and the whole mystique around them, the whole histories around them, still frightens people.
It is quite frightening, because even like certain little bits that I was reading in memos and things was like top secret stuff, and you know, they decided, you know, these should be destroyed by fire. I was one of the things. Oh my God, that is so clandestine and just really, really a bit scary, actually.
But I mean, in present time, they handle these things a lot better than they used to. You talk about
that's good to hear, actually.
Yes, they incinerate them now rather than just torching them and letting the smoke blow across the Peak District or something like that. There's a great one where I read a news report that local women were in the 50s were complaining about their neck curtains disintegrating because of the black smoke coming off a site called Harper Hill up in the Peak District.
Oh my God.
So
dissolving neck curtains. Quite frightening, isn't
yeah,
it?
but,
It really
but,
is
but
like...
I mean, I'm living in Cork, and my own mother-in-law remembers back in the 70s when companies like Pfizer Pharmaceuticals would hire a boat once a month, go outside Cork Harbour and just chuck everything into the sea.
That was just the done thing
That
at
was
the time,
the done
so there was
thing.
no law against it, so it was
There was
okay
no
for them to do that.
Europe weren't breathing down the
Yeah.
Irish government's neck. Now they are. They have instituted rules and regulations were a lot more stricter. But it's still annoying the fact that these things have been disposed of. Still gives you,
doesn't it? Yeah, it
a
really
little
does.
fright. Yeah.
Dara, I'm really looking forward to seeing all the images up on the wall. You're mid hanging as we speak now, so I'm not going to keep you any longer. I'm going to let you get back to the work. People are going to be able to view this exhibition virtually. This is brand new to us. It's our first time doing it.
It'll be
so
fun.
You're honoured as the first artist to have your virtual exhibition here. And also we'll have other bits and pieces around of discussion and some videos maybe with and maybe some more information from yourself about the various pieces of work and stuff like that. So
I look very much
people
forward to
just keep in touch with us through our website and all our social media channels, they'll be able to keep in touch with everything that's going on here throughout the month. Thanks a million for your time.
Thank you.
Best of luck with the show.
Thank you very much.
And a big thanks to Dara again for having a chat with me this week. The exhibition opens on April the 6th and runs until May the 1st and will be available virtually. Stay connected with us through our social media channels for all the details on how to watch. And if you'd like to contact the podcast, the email address is southtippartspodcast@gmail.com. That's southtippartspodcast@gmail.com. Talk to you all next time.